Hello and welcome to the third podcast of COTRI Talks. My name is Professor Dr. Wolfgang Georg Alt. I'm the CEO of COTRI, China Outbound Tourism Research Institute. Today, our topic is when and how will China reopen its borders again? And this is certainly a question which many people are asking me and many people want to know, as China is simply the biggest international tourism source market in the world. So let's have a look. What are the arguments for the reopening of the market? And also what might be the situation of China's outbound tourism after we have reopened the market. Let me start by reminding you that outbound tourism from China has grown significantly over the past 15 years due to two main forces. One, a steady booming economy that expanded the Chinese upper middle class and its consumption power, as well as the government's easing of its control over outbound mobility for leisure, business, educational, and other activities. The restrictions on mobility imposed during the SARS-CoV-19 pandemic have, however, as we all know, deeply disrupted these positive dynamics. The good news is that the Chinese economy has recovered much faster than all other G20 countries. This has a positive impact on the intentions of the upper 10% of the Chinese society to start traveling abroad as soon as the availability of visa, air connections, and trust in the safety of travel and of destinations have been reestablished. So the big questions everybody is asking now is, when will China reopen its borders and how will China's tourism be after the restart? We have seen that from very small beginnings in 1983, in 1997, actually China for the first time acknowledged, so the Chinese government especially acknowledged for the first time that there are Chinese citizens who want to travel for their own leisure, paying themselves, and that led to the so-called provisional regulations for travels by Chinese citizens abroad on their own cost. So this is less than a quarter of a century ago, but in this period of time, China became the number one tourism source market in the world. And by 2019, the amount of money spent for international travel by Chinese were double the amount of number two, number three, USA and Germany, so actually higher than both of these markets combined. And we had reached a point where many countries offered Chinese visa-free entry or a visa on arrival or an e-visa or at least multiple entry visa, with Schengen area and Europe being the only big exception. So the sophistication of travelers had been increasing in the last decade, and we saw much more special interest trips. We saw more young and old travelers joining, so travelers below the age of 18 and above the age of 55 traveling in bigger numbers. We saw more travelers from second and lower tier cities joining the pioneers from their first tier cities. And of course, this was based on much more information available for outbound travelers from fellow outbound travelers and from destination marketing, so that the Chinese could choose more wisely what they wanted to do based on their own experience and on the many good advices and information available. And not unimportantly, also the language had already become smaller because more people learn English in China, and also you have machines to help you with the automatic translation. So, but on the other hand, we saw that the Chinese and their numbers also in some places created negative results and negative reactions, because they were simply sometimes seen as a reason for over-tourism and overcrowding, even so, of course, they were only part of that problem. And this was partly true because Chinese were not offered special activities and special products so that they would do what everybody was doing, and therefore also would go to the major places and come at the main season because nobody else had told them what else they could do at other times of the year and maybe other parts of the destination. So that was in many places a wasted opportunity. And we could see that over time, the number of Chinese having a passport developed to up to about 10% of the Chinese population. And if we look at income levels, so this fits those people who have a income level annually of something of at least 10,000 US dollars, and very often additional income from real estate deals or from stock market deals. And if we see the top 5%, which are mostly those people doing long distance trips and more expensive trips, so then we see that this is starting with a income bracket from $20,000 a year upwards. So most affluent Chinese still live in the first tier cities, that is Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen. But we saw that more and more people from second and third tier cities have been joining, even so we can expect that on average they might have less abilities to speak English and may have less experience starting later in their career as international tourists, and therefore may be less able to tell you exactly what they want from their previous experiences. So how do they travel? Clearly, already before the pandemic, we could see that these cliche of Chinese traveling in a coach, 45 people in one bus, and going to one country in one day and to the next country the next day, and following behind the flag of the tour guide, that this became less and less even before COVID stroke. And we actually had a research program together with trip.com where we found that we were heading towards a split of the market into three almost equal parts, which is the traditional group tours on the one hand and FITs, self-organized travelers, on the other end. But in the middle, something called customized travel, so small groups of travelers traveling together with or without a tour guide, but where they tell the tour operator what they want to do and they get a customized bespoke program, especially for their needs and interests. And that can be a tour operator in China or an OTA like trip.com, or of course an inbound tour operator based in the destination as well. So we mentioned before, it's not only that people from lower tier cities have been joining already before the pandemic, but also we had much more children traveling either with their parents or for summer camps or other school group or students group activities. But also, and maybe even more importantly, we had the silver travelers, people above the age of 55, which is the pension age for women in China. 60 is for men, at least until now. So, and if we look at the latest census results published in May this year, the number of Chinese aged 60 and above are already 265 million, which is 20% of the total population. And if you add those 55 plus, especially among the women, you end up with almost 25% of the population. Not all of them necessarily have enough money to travel internationally, but those who have will have, in many cases, already some travel experience, and very importantly, will have more time to travel, and also will not have to rely on school holidays, so that they can also be offered products and services, especially for them in spring and autumn, or maybe even in winter. In any case, it should be clear that there is nothing existing as the Chinese outbound traveler, and that it is very important that there is a clear analysis of what kind of travelers can we attract, where what is a fitting between the market segment and what we can offer, and that then accordingly destinations or companies adapt the products to this specific group. And what we can see, of course, in what we will discuss later on, that all these developments I just mentioned already were in the making before the pandemic hit, but lots of this is increased and has been accelerated by the development of the COVID-19 and the situation that the Chinese have been locked into their country for now 1.5 years, and maybe it will take a few months more before this is ending. But this is not true for all of them, because one market segment which is often overlooked is the group of Chinese nationals who are currently living abroad, may it be for work or in many cases also for studies. Chinese students are an important source of income for the education system in many destinations. And these students, which mostly come from well-to-do companies in China, have a habit of using their vacations to travel and explore destinations in the region where they are located. They have no, or at least less, visa problems. Normally, they don't have major language barriers, and they can also be attracted for a short weekend trip or for a singular event if this is attractive for them and they know about it. There are also Chinese expatriates, which are also a relatively easy to address market. They often earn Western level manager wages and often are bored living in the country outside of China without their family. And they will either also go on short trips or they can add some days to a business trip to do some leisure activities. So this is a brief introduction how the situation was before the pandemic. So let's see what will happen and when it will happen. So clearly, the reopening of China's outbound tourism depends on three preconditions. First, the permission to leave China and the permission to enter the destination without quarantine, either on the way out or on the way back into China. Secondly, connectivity, so that there are enough affordable air connections, that there are enough aircraft flying back and forth at affordable prices. And thirdly, and probably most importantly, the trust of the Chinese outbound travelers that the destinations are safe, that hygiene standards are high, level of vaccination is high, so that they don't have to be afraid if they travel being themselves vaccinated to these places. Some have argued that China will keep the borders closed for another year or even longer, but this is very unlikely to happen. So even if some experts talk now about the development of China under Xi Jinping towards a West Korea, so meaning that China will become more like North Korea, this, in my point of view, cannot be the case. Even though the celebrations for the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China's founding look very much like developed by a North Korean event designer, China's integration into the global economy is simply much too strong and too deep that it can for a long time keep the borders closed for persons traveling into China and out of China. So never underestimate the power of the demand. And we can clearly see that international travel has been for the last 15 years a part of the contrat social between the government and the upper strata of the Chinese society, trading the right to choose the government for the opportunity to start private companies, to own a private car, and to have the freedom to travel abroad. In that sense, even without the need to face democratic elections, the Chinese government still needs to keep the interest of these citizens in mind and keep them happy. So therefore, it was a good sign to see that a few weeks ago, Xi Jinping and the Prime Minister of Greece signed an agreement for a Greece-China Year of Culture and Tourism, which will start in September 2021, and which is expressively there to support also tourism in both directions. So maybe that is a positive sign that Xi Jinping personally got involved into this movement to start tourism from September this year. And I think clearly there is no other way. COVID-19 is here to stay. The policy aiming at zero cases must fail. It will just not happen. And sooner or later, Australia, China, and some other countries will have to face this reality. With vaccination and soon medication becoming available, SARS-2 CoV-19 will become just another nuisance like other illnesses are as well and have been for many years. Therefore, the October Golden Week might be a possible data for the restart, especially if the Tokyo Olympic Games can be conducted without major problems. It's very likely, though, that some bubbles to open travel to some countries will come first, those which are considered especially safe. And probably, as many of my colleagues, both in China and abroad, agree, it will probably come at short notice. Who will travel first? Well, probably the first Chinese outbound travelers post COVID-19 will be motivated by business, family, and education, so not by leisure. While until recently everybody agreed that Greater China and the neighboring countries will come first as a destination, while looking at the current, at least COVID-19 numbers, it might well be that Europe and some other destinations having lower levels of infections and having the pandemic under more control compared to some Asian destinations in the region might get the first wave of new Chinese travelers. So, what does it mean for the development of China after the pandemic? Clearly, seeing the world with their own eyes and sampling new experiences will remain what the Chinese travelers want, like gaining social prestige, confirming the status and the self-image of the traveler. Following serious leisure interests will still be strong and probably become even more important. Following the examples of peers and celebrities and idols, following in the footsteps of famous people will be important. And there will be lots of other reasons to travel, like business, health, certainly getting more and more important, education, religion, still shopping, if to a lesser degree than before. But there will be some extra and some additional aspects. Certainly, there is from all the surveys we can see there's an increased interest in nature activities, in healthy, fresh air, outdoor places. The interest to travel with other family members or your best friends in small groups has increased, as also in China, like I think in many places, we all have learned the value of good friends and of solidarity in the family. And there's clearly an increased interest of traveling to new destinations, smaller destinations, destinations where not so many other Chinese are, and anyway, not so many other tourists are, and also an increased interest in getting in contact with the local culture, with good people, and having a higher degree on authenticity and also sustainability. So we will probably talk more about this at a later podcast with some interview partners. But for today, so that you don't have to take my word for what will happen, let me quote two important leaders of tourism. One being Dr. Mario Hardy, who until a few weeks ago was the CEO of Pater. And what he had to say was recently, the future of tourism will depend more on length of stay and visitor satisfaction than on a generic and simple headcount of arrivals. Metrics that can track such indicators will possibly become a new standard for determining tourism potential and performance in what is likely to continue being a volatile world. So, pointing out the need for quality products and for customized products. And finally, Petra Hedorfer, the CEO of the German National Tourism Board since more than a decade, recently mentioned in a communication to me, yes, indeed, Wolfgang, tailor-made offers, specific targeting, and reshaped offers for the new mindset, including community management, are essential. So I leave you with that and looking forward next week to another interesting interview partner. And for now, I hope you enjoyed this podcast and you recommend it to your friends and colleagues. Stay safe, stay healthy, and goodbye.